Welcome to Terry Third Thursday. I'm Shantanu Chatterjee. I'm Dean of the Terry College of Business, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Terry Executive Education Center here today. Now, for those of us joining us for the first time, the Terry Third Thursday is our monthly breakfast series based here in Atlanta, bringing together alumni, students, and professionals to connect and learn. And none of this happens without the hard work of our dedicated alumni board members and the Terry Development and Alumni Relations team from Athens. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge their efforts in putting this program together. Please also join me in thanking our long-standing corporate sponsor, Synovus, and media sponsor, Public Broadcasting Atlanta, WABE. We deeply appreciate their support for not only this event, but also for the Terry College of Business and the University of Georgia. We are here today to explore the intersection of elite athletic performance and high-level organizational leadership, a space where the huddle meets the boardroom. It is a privilege to welcome back Terry alum Aaron Murray as our speaker today. From 2010 to 2013, he was the heartbeat of the Georgia Bulldogs, setting SEC records with 121 career touchdown passes and amassing over 13,000 passing yards. I've never thrown a yard in my life, so that's a lot for me. My son tells me I can't even hold a football properly. Now, after 3 seasons in the NFL with the Chiefs and Eagles, Aaron successfully transitioned from the turf to the studio. He's now in his 9th season as a premier college football analyst for ESPN. But Aaron's impact isn't just on the screen. As a co-founder of Red Zone Advantage, a leadership development firm that bridges the gap between the field and the office, Aaron continues to work as a dedicated coach, mentoring the next generation of quarterbacks to master both the physical and mental demands of the game. Alongside Aaron today is the co-founder of Red Zone Advantage, Dr. Brian Hoffman, who brings the science to complement Aaron's on-field experience. Brian is an internationally recognized leadership scientist and professor of industrial organization psychology here at UGA. An elected fellow of the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology with over 40 published articles, Brian specializes in leadership development, talent acquisition, and the future of work. Whether in a sports setting or in a corporate boardroom, Brian is a global expert on helping organizations acquire and develop top-tier talent. So please join me in welcoming Aaron Murray and Brian Hoffman.
Thank you. I can give you some lessons afterwards if you want to work on that arm. How to grip it. Well, good morning, everyone. As you said, I'm Aaron Murray, former University of Georgia quarterback and NFL quarterback, now working with ESPN, and started the Red Zone Advantage with my good buddy here, Dr. Brian Hoffman, who was my professor. Man, we're gray now, over a decade ago, a long, long time ago. And he's obviously, like you alluded to, a leading researcher when it comes to leadership and development. Thank you for having us. Thank you, Terry, for having us here this morning. This is an incredible room. I heard it's a packed house tonight, so appreciate all you dogs coming out here to listen and have some fun as well. I'll be honest, like when I was at Georgia, the last thing I was going to do at 7 a.m. was show up to a business meeting. I was too busy being a football player and being a leader, or at least trying to be what I thought a leader was going to be when it comes to being a college football quarterback. And one day, I thought I've learned a lot about leadership in my life, but the biggest things that I've learned about how to be a leader didn't come from Coach Rick, didn't come from my high school coach, didn't come from Coach Reed when I was in the NFL. It came from a professor that I met heading into my junior year, heading into my junior season. And when I went up to Professor Hoffman and said, "This is the kind of leader I am. I'm a leader who leads by example," this is what he had to say about that.
I said that was complete bullshit. I've often heard, particularly in sports settings, this idea of leading by example. And my thought was that that's just a way to abdicate leadership. Right? That's a way to not actually lead. To say you let your play on the field do the talking, do the leading, is a way to not take ownership of the role you have. But more generally, here's the thing. Companies spend $60 to $100 billion a year on trying to develop leadership. Most of that goes to classroom training, or you're chasing an HBR trend, or you're trying to learn the latest and greatest leadership style. But the research consistently indicates that these approaches barely move the needle, right? They don't seem to register a substantial impact on leaders' growth. And so when Aaron came to me and we talked about helping him grow and develop as a leader, we thought we would try something a little bit different.
Which really meant that Brian was going to put me to work for 5 months, which was a lot of fun, but a lot of obviously at work in my doctoral program.
And that is not inaccurate. We certainly put him to work.
So I've always dreamed about being a quarterback. Could throw a football at a very young age and wanted to be eventually a quarterback at a major SEC program. I lived in the South. I'm from Tampa, Florida. And I always remember when I got to UJ and got in Sanford Stadium for my very first start, understanding that playing the quarterback position is not just about throwing a football really, really far. I am the leader. I was expected to be the leader. And that was tough at times. I can go back to my freshman year. We went 6-7. That would be, I mean, we would think the walls are burning down right now if Georgia ever went 6-7 again with Kirby. But that's what it felt like for me as a leader, because those are my guys. Those are the guys that I was, even as a freshman, was supposed to be the one in charge, the one leading the way. So it was very difficult for me. And I remember, about a year after that, leading into my third season, I obviously was playing really well, one of the best quarterbacks in the country at the time. But there was just something missing. It wasn't obviously the play in the field. It was never my preparation. I always was someone that prided myself on the way that I prepared for games, the way I watched film, took notes, and really assisted guys around me. It was in my leadership. I felt like there was a gap between what I was doing to serve my team and what I needed to do to take that to the next level, to help support them and hopefully take us, at the end of the day, everyone's goal is to win a championship. So I needed to seek out some help. And I remember I was in the industrial and organizational doctoral program, which tried preparing for those exams, also trying to prepare for Alabama. There was a lot of work, but I sought out help. And I was like, I want to be a better leader for my football team. And that's when I found Brian, who was obviously a leading expert in the field, and wanted to find some scientific proof of this is how we're going to take your game to the next level.
And I was a professor at UGA very early in my career, as Aaron said, no gray hair then. And so I was just getting started on my research and practice of developing leaders, understanding how leaders develop. So very early in my career. And when he walked into my office, I was already starting to come to the realization that the typical approaches that we use to develop leaders don't seem to work. And so when he sat down across from me and said that he led by example,
which I did,
I might have been slightly more blunt than necessary, but my point remained that there was probably more that he could do to lead his team and to develop as a leader. And so here's the problem with much of the common practice in leadership development. It confuses knowing with doing. And I think that's sort of what Aaron was doing. I think Mike Tyson said it best when he said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And this is sort of consistent in corporate settings, right? You often promote your best task performer to a leadership role, the one who has the most technical competence, without giving them, or without any regard for whether they have the skills, the competence to actually lead. And so we sort of throw them to the wolves and hope that technical competence translates into leadership skills. But that rarely works. The knowledge doesn't transfer automatically. Instead, it has to be developed under pressure. And so what actually does work? So in the 1990s, a group from the Center for Creative Leadership started asking executives a question, a simple question. Describe an experience that shaped you as a leader, right? What was the most important experience that has happened in your career that shaped you as a leader? And the answer was never a training or a workshop. The answer was always some assignment that scared them a little bit, right? Something they thought was outside of their maybe range of ability, something that caused them to leave their comfort zone, right? And try something that they'd never tried before. So 30 years of research has followed up on this idea, and these are now known as challenge assignments or stretch assignments. And this research consistently shows that this is the most effective way to develop leadership. Is put leaders in some situation that allows them to get leadership reps, if you will.
Yeah, so during my time at Georgia, we had the opportunity to have a bunch of speakers, whether it was a former player, a motivational speaker, someone that's done really something impressive with their life, come in front of 115 young men and try and give them essentially a pump-up speech, try to get them motivated, try to figure out a way to correct whatever they need to correct in their lives, both on and off the field. They would talk about belief, they talk about hard work, they talk about mental toughness. And it was fine. I mean, it was all great. I mean, you left there feeling pretty good, but then you got onto the meeting, you went on to the meeting, you went on the practice, and you kind of, you forgot the message a little bit. No one ever sat down with me and said specifically, this is what you need. You as the quarterback at the University of Georgia, this is what you need to better yourself as a leader going forward. There was a gap, and that was something that I needed to hear. There was something missing. It was never inspiration. I had plenty of inspiration in my life. I heard plenty of great stories. What I really needed was a mirror. And I need someone to hand me a plan, which is exactly what Brian did, starting with making me do something I did not do a lot of, actual homework heading into that season.
So we started with the question, as Aaron and I spoke, as we're trying to figure out how to develop as a leader. Well, the first question is, what does leadership look like in your world? Right? I'd studied leadership, but primarily in corporate settings, some in political settings. But what does it look like in sports setting? And so we do what academics do. We consulted the literature to look to see, is there anything out there on leading a team as a member of the team in sports settings? We couldn't find anything. And so we sort of had to start at the beginning, right? We had to go back to square one and try to define what this looks like. And sort of our main question was, does the leadership that as we define it in the boardroom, does that translate to the locker room, right? Can we take the lessons that we've learned in the leadership styles and competencies that we talk about in corporate settings and apply them to sports settings? And so back in the 70s, a leadership researcher had a very similar question. In fact, you Terry alum might remember his name from your intro to management class, Mintzberg. Was a famous leadership researcher. And so what he did in the 70s, he had a very similar question. Said, let me see what leadership looks like among executives. And so to answer that, he went and followed around executives and sort of observed them directly to see what they did on a day-to-day basis. And so he said, well, if it's good enough for Mintzberg, we'll try the same thing. And so we thought that we would try to directly observe leadership of sports teams. One challenge was that Peyton Manning and Tom Brady kept calling the cops when Aaron was in the bushes trying to write down everything they did. So we had to come up with a workaround, which became the Aaron's senior research project.
And when he says Aaron, he means himself, trying to follow them around. So to prevent, all the hassle of following Peyton Manning and Tom around, we came up with the next best idea, which is watching something called Mic'd Up. So for those who don't know what Mic'd Up is, it is a incredible behind the scenes access that the NFL Network, now ESPN, does, where players, coaches, get mic'd up, and it's, like I said, it's behind the scenes. You get to see how they interact with their teammates. You get to see, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning in the huddle calling plays, how they get ready for a 2-minute drive, how they handle throwing an interception or getting sacked. And for me, this was a joy. Like I said earlier, I love watching tape. I love going in there and figuring out the game plan. And so for my project, for when I was a part of the IO program, to essentially just sit there and watch hours and hours in code the best quarterbacks in the world and seeing what their leadership traits are. And we came up with a few competencies for me to code along the way. It was an absolute pleasure. It was so much fun to do that project. And I remember one of the guys that really stood out to me as I watched, like I said, Tom, Payne, Drew Brees, some of the best quarterbacks at that time, was Drew Brees. And for a lot of reasons. One, we're neither of us are very tall. Drew's about 6'1". He tore his right labrum. I tore my right labrum. He was always really good in the community. He was always known as a really good leader for his football team. So getting to see this access and behind the scenes of just his consistency, the way he interacted, not just with the offensive guys, because so many quarterbacks just worry about their side of the business, their side of the football team, the offensive line, the receivers, the running backs. But he really dived into everyone, the defense, the D-line, the cornerbacks, making sure those guys were ready to go every time they had an opportunity to go in the field. The way he interacted with his coaches, it was all a consistent message every single game, every single opportunity. And it really taught me it's not about that rah-rah speech. And we all love the rah-rah speech, don't get me wrong. I listen to listen to Kirby in some of the leaked speeches that come out, and I was like, man, I want to run through a damn wall when I hear some of those. But it was just how he treated every single moment of, this is my vision for myself as a leader. This is my vision for the football team. And every moment, regardless if it was on tape or not on tape, really hit that measurement.
And so we sort of, as Aaron was coding these behaviors, we found that there were 8 competencies that define being a sports leader. And they really substantially overlapped with the common competencies you guys have seen in leadership role, in your leadership roles. They broke down broadly into what we called field general versus player coach. But it basically boiled down to working with your players and then being tactically in command and holding teammates accountable. Now, there were some aspects that didn't translate. As a leader of basically a cross-functional team, so he was as a leader of a football team, he doesn't have any position power, right? He can't determine who starts, who sits. He can't reward and punish people. So there were some differences. But even those we're seeing starting to fall away in corporate settings. We're seeing as levels of management have reduced, and as we're working more and more on cross-functional teams, it is indeed that lateral influence that seems to be the most important at separating the great leaders from everyone else. So there actually was a good deal of overlap. And so that sort of supported our ideas and led us to our next step. So we knew that leadership from corporate settings and the competencies can translate. And so our next question was, well, if I were trying to develop a leader, as I have in the past, in corporate, from a corporate setting, what would I do? Right. Well, the first step is to get a baseline of their leadership competencies. How do we do that? Probably the most common tool, and I would bet most of you have been subjected to this at least at some point in your career, is 360 feedback. Or 360 feedback, yeah, written on their head. And so we built a 360 feedback for Aaron that was specifically tailored using language and competencies to the sports world. It's called the Pro Lead. It's something that we still use an adapted version of today. And we had 65 of his teammates and 5 of his coaches evaluate his leadership competencies to determine where Aaron sat as a leader and what his level of leadership was.
Yeah, and I was obviously very confident heading into this. Like, yeah, of course I'll do this. I'm going to get amazing feedback back from my coaches and teammates about me as a leader. And it was mostly good, I would say, right? It was mostly good. It was pretty good. Definitely very humbling, though. But hey, listen, at that time, I'd been named team captain for UJ for 2 straight years. And that's something that's voted on by my teammates and by the coaching staff. So I was like, of course I'm a great leader. Why else would they why else would they vote for me for this incredible role for one of the best teams in all of college football? And then we got the results back. And it was a very humbling experience to get the results back, especially from your peers, guys that you work with day in and day out. But it was something that obviously I needed to take myself to the next level. And the one area that stood out, because it was the lowest I actually scored myself on. It was the lowest that my coaching staff scored me on, and it was the lowest that my teammates scored me on as well, was holding teammates accountable, which when you're a 20-year-old is very difficult to do. And it was funny, my boy Keith Marshall's here today, and we were kind of talking a little bit about this before we came up here, and he's like, yeah, you were never really an a-hole, you pushed us, but you were, and it was that was always the difficulty. You're 20, 21 years old, and these are your peers, these are your buddies, these are the guys that you go to study hall with, these are the guys that you're in early morning weightlifting with, these are the guys you're going with after practice to go play video games or go to dinner with. How can I kind of blur that line of when we're on the field, when we cross that white line, holding you to this standard, but then when we get off of it, can we still be buddies? And that was, I struggled to do that. So getting the feedback for them saying, we want you not to necessarily be an a-hole, but we want you to hold us to a different standard. We want you to hold us to a standard that's going to help lead us to championships. So like I said, very humbling experience to get those results back, but something that I needed in order to take myself to the next level.
And I remember vividly when we calculated the results and we sat down with you and gave the meeting. And it really did stand out that he was a great leader before this. Like, he was evaluated very favorably from coaches and teammates. The holding teammates accountable definitely stood out as a low end. And in fact, we were reviewing his feedback from way back when and saw that every single coach who provided, actually 4 of the 5, who provided an open-ended comment right at the end mentioned he could do a better job holding teammates accountable in some language. expecting more from his teammates, demanding more. So this was a clear trend. And that really helped, which is one of the hardest parts in getting feedback, is accepting that feedback and internalizing. I think that's a tough thing for everybody to do, is when you get negative feedback, to buy into it. It's so easy to dismiss that feedback. And so having this come from different perspectives, from people that Aaron respected, and from so many people, helped him probably buy into it and sort of go all in on what we're going to do about it.
Well, you say sometimes too, a lot of times people negatively react to these 360 feedbacks, and that's always a challenge as well.
Absolutely. And you did not. You're all ever positive. I looked over the email that you sent back. You said it was basically, all these feedback are great and so helpful. Apparently, I need to work more towards holding teammates accountable. Yeah. Let's get on it, 3 exclamation points. So it was sort of easy to get that buy-in with Aaron. So Aaron's processes feedback, and now the hard part, right? How do we help him grow, right? Do we give him a book on holding teammates accountable? As we've said, not particularly helpful. Do we give him a course on holding teammates accountable? Not helpful. Instead, we put him in a situation that would help him hold teammates accountable. And so we proceeded to design a challenge assignment, or what we call it a leadership rep, that would allow him to sort of put him in that situation.
Yeah, so we took obviously the 360 feedback, but also to create this challenge assignment, we also need to figure out, what do we need as a football team to get better? So it's kind of blending the two, feedback plus, is there a certain need that we can really tap into to put you in to essentially put me in a position to work on holding teammates accountable? So the gap was clear, that obviously I need to hold my teammates accountable, but the team need was just as clear to me. So for those who don't know, it's a little bit different today than it was back then, but off-season workouts were optional, which is crazy to think about. So the summer months between, really the coaches are on vacation a little bit, or they're recruiting June and July. So we don't see our coaches until August. Really our only interaction with any sort of coach is our strength staff. But those workouts for those 2 months, like I said, are completely up to you. Do you want to show up? Do you want to get stronger? Do you want to get faster? Do you want to show up to the 7-on-7s and the 1-on-1s? And that was not very consistent. And in previous years leading up to that year, I would say about 50, 60% of the time guys were showing up. There's a lot of other things that you want to do in Athens, Georgia on a June or July afternoon, between going to the pool, going to the bars, hanging out in the dorm room, playing video games, whatever else. So it was a challenge. It was a challenge to get guys there. So we have my needs to hold teammates accountable. We have now the problem of guys are not showing up consistently, or at least to the level which I believed we needed to do to truly compete for a championship heading into that season in 2012. So the challenge assignment was this for me: design and run a goals program for the entire offseason to increase engagement and optional workouts. It wasn't an attendance program, a goals program. So every player on our roster that summer set goals for themselves. We then had 11 leaders. So I created 11 leaders, guys, mostly juniors and rising seniors. And each one of those guys would then have 10 guys underneath them for this leadership and goals program. And I got in front of the team, and Brian said, "Don't do this," but I said, "I'm going to do it." And I got not the getting from the team, but I said, I'm gonna make a bold statement here, guys. So I got in front of 115 of my teammates, my peers, and laid out what I needed to do. First off, I had to ask them permission to do the 360 survey. So I thanked them for the survey, thanked them for that, told them what the results were, told them what I needed to do to be a better leader for them. And then I laid out these goal programs. So every guy, like I said, made goals for that summer in order to accomplish. And then I ended it with saying, my goal is, can we make 100% attendance? Which was to go from 50 to 60% all the way to 100 was a little bold, I would say.
I thought ill-advised at the time.
Yeah, a little ill-advised, but that was what we needed to, in my opinion, that's what we needed to do to have success.
And so to set that goal was a audacious goal. Right, I was impressed, but they did it. They got close to 95%. There were a couple guys that were maybe sick and missed a few days, but they had 95% participation. So to pause here and to think about that for a second, as a professor, I teach people of this age, and I have a mandatory attendance policy. It's not it's voluntary, right? My students have to attend, and I cannot get them to show up to class, right? Whereas these 20-year-old football players could voluntarily come in, and together as a team, they decided they would come in 3 days a week over the summer to all their workouts and set that goal, and they achieved it. That might be the single greatest feat of leadership that I've ever seen.
Well, and it wasn't just the guy short. It was, to me, watching those other leaders hold each other accountable, or holding the guys underneath them accountable for their actions. It was the bonding moments of, we have set a goal. You personally have set a goal for yourself. We have set this audacious goal of 100%. And we created some competition along the way. You know, this was pre-NIL, so we couldn't just give someone like $100,000 for showing up to workouts. Unfortunately, that would have been nice. But you know, you get maybe a free pair of shoes, an extra pair of shorts. It's so funny to think about that. You know, you got juice for a free pair of shoes.
Right.
Days are like, you know, we get free, like 100 pairs of free shoes whenever we want. So little different time. Not that I'm salty or anything like that. But to say that's when I really knew things had changed. When everyone, like I said, was really holding each other accountable that summer to make sure that we as a team were able to meet those goals that we set 2 months before.
And so what Aaron's describing is sort of the bedrock of the challenge assignment, and the reason organizations find it to be valuable. One, it helped him develop as a leader, right? I remember him telling me a story. So at the end of the summer, they had makeup days, right? So he had SEC Media Day, and so people miss workouts for various reasons, but they had a few weeks of makeup days. So they had that little board in the locker room where each person showed up, and you put an X by their name. And so if you'd missed days, you could make them up at the end. In the last 2 days, there were a couple guys who had missed their few days, and Aaron drove to their apartment, picked him up, and brought him in for their last day. And that's an extreme example, but first, this assignment put him in the position that he had to hold teammates accountable, right? So he needed to work on this, and there's no hiding, right? There's no way to not put him in a position where it demanded that of him. But what it also did was provided the team, the organization, something they needed, right? They needed greater attendance in the workouts, and they needed other leaders to step up and take ownership. And so a well-designed challenge assignment, leadership rep sort of does both. It fills the need that the organization has and helps the leader develop a competency that they need to develop.
So the payoff,
Yeah.
how did it work out? I think that's the big thing. How did this work out? Well, it was 3 yards short, I guess, in that Alabama game. 3 yards short that season. And the amount of times that I think about that game, wake up sweating, nightmares from that game against Alabama, 3 yards short. But this is what I knew immediately after the game, and I knew it in the locker room just as it is cleared. The national championship was never the goal. And I know how that sounds, bear with me. When I stood up in front of the team that night before the game, I didn't talk about winning a trophy. I talked about that summer workout. I talked about guys showing up when no one made them. I talked about the goals that everyone individually set for themselves that summer, and that the fact that they were able to keep them. I talked about a team that had learned to hold itself accountable from the inside out. That was the goal, and we already met it essentially before the ball even kicked off. 3 yards short on a scoreboard, not 3 yards short of what that season was actually about. And a lot of us know this when we play athletics, that your career comes and goes. The NFL comes and goes. You get, the NFL stands for not for long. You get your 3.5 years, we say a cup of coffee, and not all of us can be Matthew Stafford 20 years in the NFL, which he's just absolutely kicking butt. But the work stays with us. What we did that summer, the development as a leader, myself, the rest of my teammates, that science, that framework, the feeling of watching someone grow into a leader right in front of you because you put them in a situation to do that. I spent 13 years in the back of my mind coming back to that summer. What we built, what I did to that team, thinking about how many organizations out there also have that same empty butt smear facility in the middle of July. Talented people, but with real no development. Leaders with titles, but no mirrors. And eventually I picked up the phone and called Brian, and that's how we've got today the Red Zone Advantage.
Yeah, and honestly, that's what challenge assignments sort of do at their best. They don't always end in success. You don't always get the win the championship. But the idea was to help Aaron develop as a leader and grow as a leader and see that process. And that's where it was successful. So 3 yards short on the scoreboard, but something that stuck with him for the rest of his life. And so here's the sort of question that we ask to sports teams and to organizations now is think about your high potential people and how do you deal with them? right? How do you do with your high potential performers? Do you protect your high potential performers, or do you put them in situations that will allow them to grow and allow them to develop at the risk of failure, right? And so that's something that is tough to sit with. And I think if we think about it, most organizations often protect their high potential performers.
I would think so. Honestly, I spent a long time thinking about the story about a decade ago, about what a quarterback and a professor were able to accomplish back in 2012. But then, over time, I've sat in front of a lot of business leaders and realized that, my story, my leadership development over a decade ago is not just my story, but it's everyone's story. It's everyone's opportunity, because we all have people in our lives or people on our team right now that need to walk into someone's office like Brian's and figure out, hey, I'm talented, I'm motivated, I'm carrying a title, but there's a little bit of a gap that I need to get filled in my life in order to be the most successful leader and person I can be for my team or for my organization. So that's why we built the Red Zone Advantage. It's a thing I wish every leader could really have. I know that there are some people that raised their hands that said they have had an opportunity to do a 360 survey, but to be able to get a real baseline, scientifically grounded in this 360 feedback for the way leadership actually works in today's world. A challenge assignment, like I said, I never heard of a challenge assignment before meeting Brian, but to specifically have one designed for you to put you in uncomfortable situations, to grow you, to fill those gaps that your organization and that you need is an experience that, like I said, I'll never forget, even 13 years later. So my thing is for everyone here today, once again, appreciate you all coming out here. But if there is anyone in your organization or you personally who feels like you have a gap that you need to fill to better yourself in your life personally or for work, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you, create a challenge assignment, give you some feedback, have some fun along the way. And like I said, my story 13, 14 years ago could be your story today. So thank you all. I think we're going to open up for Q&A right now, but got to give a little go dogs before we do so. So thank you guys.
Go Dogs. So yeah, we have time to open up for your questions. Oh, yeah. So sort of all across the board. So all sports, all team sports.
Yep.
So individual sports don't lend itself quite as well to leadership, but both team sports and corporate work. So both, yeah. And it ranges primarily focusing on leadership development, but given my expertise, also talent acquisition, and things like that. So yeah, we sort of run the gambit. And I think the idea is to put our worlds together,
Yes.
right? To put sort of the elite performance, high pressure performance with leadership science and organizational science.
Thank you for your time. So coming out of college,
Thank you. Coming out of college, you start experiencing a paycheck, but you also start experiencing life.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know from any trends corporately or trends, through Aaron, your contacts for when people experience personal hardships that may be a bereavement leave or you don't have the luxury of an unpaid time off, an extended period of time. Are there things to fill gaps and when you get punched in the nose, right, that people do to create a game plan that seem to be consistent? Obviously, a lot of this stuff is personalized and tailored, but are there certain pillars that are consistent?
Yeah. So I mean, this is certainly a booming area of inquiry and thought in management, and so we view it from a few perspectives. Basically, we're talking about what resources you have to help fortify yourself to that punch in the gut. And so there are two types of resources that we study: organizational resources, and that's what your organization can do, and that ranges from formal organizational policy, for example, bereavement leave, for example, vacation time, for example, maternity leave would be nice as well. But and so we have the organizational leave, and then we have the informal organizational networks. We're talking about what your supervisor can do. And that's one of the sort of core areas of leadership, is sort of personalized leadership, individualized leadership, of sort of taking care of your people. And so sort of informal means that your supervisor and your direct supervisor can do to take care of you. And so that's the one side. And then there is the other side, which is the personal resources. And that's your family support, your family network, your personal resources, hardiness. And so it's sort of a mix of those two determines who can sort of navigate those successfully. But no matter what personal resources you have, if your company doesn't offer you the resources, then you won't be successful in navigating those. And so I think that underscores the importance that business leaders put systems in place to take care of their people during those times of hardship.
I would say from a athletic standpoint too, there's always this mindset of like a band of brothers kind of thing. Kind of to your second point of, these are the guys that you're in the trenches with day in and day out. So when someone does experience some sort of hardship in their life, your brothers are kind of there for you. We're not blood brothers, but we're brothers by the fact that we're wearing the same jersey week in and week out. So it's always pick your guys up. We're all experiencing things both on and off the field. Guy gets, demoted from first string to second string. A guy gets injured. And I would say injury is probably the hardest thing for us in our world, because when you get injured, and I experienced this my senior year, you almost feel like you're not a part of the team anymore. I was a starting. I started 52 straight games in the SEC, which I think is still the record at Georgia. It's a lot of games, it's a lot of punishment. So to make it that long, I'm still impressed with myself because I'm not the biggest of guys. But I remember when I got hurt my second to last game senior year, and we're getting ready for Georgia Tech the next week, and I'm on the table in the rehab room, doing stuff on my post surgery on my ACL. And I just want everything to stop. I'm like, stop going to meetings, stop doing this, because I can't go. You feel so isolated and alone. And I remember Coach Bobo came up to me on that Monday. You talk about this is just great leadership. He came up to me and said, "Where are your plays for the week? Like, why did I not get your top 15 plays against Georgia Tech?" I said, "Well, I just got out of surgery, damn it. Like, give me some time." But he's like, "Just because you're hurt doesn't mean you're not a part of this football team. Just because you're hurt doesn't mean I don't expect you to go and watch some tape to help Hudson get ready." Because he knew that being injured is a very lonely spot. Like I said, you feel like everyone is moving forward to get ready for this game. You're just kind of stuck behind. So really appreciated his leadership of making sure that I was doing everything to feel involved with the game plan heading into taking down the Bumblebees.
Couple questions. So, your methodology is dependent on people giving feedback. Like, how do you get people excited about giving feedback? That's one thing I've found is like pulling teeth to get people to really, be introspective and then give feedback. And then the second question: are you still friends with Chris Conley?
Very close with Chris Conley. Love Chris. And I think for me, and I'll let Brian answer after this as well, it was obviously challenging to get in front of my teammates and say, this is, I'm going to be giving you this essentially 360 survey to give feedback on myself. The coaches loved it. There was no, I gave this to the coaching staff, like, yes, do this. We want you to be better. So they got it. I think for my peers, it was I think a little nerve wracking, but it was extremely well received because I led it with, this is going to help me and it's going to help us. So I think if they understand that this is going to benefit them as well, that this isn't something that's just for Aaron, like, oh, I'm filling this damn survey out because Aaron wants me to, because he wants to work on something. Like, yeah, I did. Selfishly, I wanted to improve. But to lead with, this is going to help us as a football team, take us to another level to win a championship. Like, okay, well, I'm going to benefit from this. Let me take it serious. That's why we had probably about pretty much every scholarship player on the team that summer or leading up to the summer filled out the survey for me.
The response rate, so 65, but you got to remember 35 had graduated, so it wouldn't have been asked. So it was a majority of the team responded. And I think similar in corporate settings, there's a vulnerability to asking and saying, I'm trying to work on this. And I think people appreciate people trying to improve themselves. And so instead of sending a blanket email to everyone, Aaron set up a meeting and asked his teammates, but sending a personalized, hey, I'm really trying to grow and develop. I would appreciate it if you would help me do so by completing this. So I think that was probably what got us the high response.
But no, very close with Chris. It wasn't Chris's fault. It was not Chris's fault. You know,
The ball was tipped.
ball was
But the ball was tipped.
ball was tipped. Ball was tipped.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Yep.
So in today's NIL environment, how does leadership work for football teams or basketball,
Yeah.
baseball? And if you could kind of give us an assessment of where UGA is right now, from that perspective, that'll be awesome.
Yeah, I would say from a leadership perspective, obviously very different. And maybe not very, very different because where I saw this in the NFL. Guys are obviously getting paid in the NFL. There's still a huge leadership need, want, and at times void from certain position groups. I think that the hardest part about leading in today's era compared to when I played is the fact that the roster is just it's evolving so much every year. So I had the ability to really grow with that comfort. Like I said, to be able to sit in front of my peers and ask them to do a survey on me, it's a little bit more comfortable when you know the guys. You can talk to them, you feel a little bit more relaxed. But if I'm Gunner, and I mean Georgia does a good job because Kirby doesn't really want to hit the portal as much. But some of these rosters are 50-60% brand new between freshmen incoming, guys leaving, and then guys coming in through the transfer portal. So you're just trying to learn their names at the end of the day sometimes. You're trying to figure out my timing with them from a quarterback receiver standpoint. And then two, those guys really have not seen you lead. So like to ask someone to, hey, can you fill this out for me? Well, I've only known you for 2 months, dude. I really don't know what kind of leader you are. I haven't seen you lead us in a football game. I haven't seen you in the fourth quarter and kind of how things take over and seen you lead an off-season program. So I think it's a little bit difficult depending on the roster. Like I said, if you're a team that utilizes the portal compared to not. But when it comes to the amount of money guys are making, I don't think that matters. Like I said, in the NFL, you still have incredible leaders. I saw incredible leadership from guys like Alex Smith was in Kansas City, even though, like I said, pretty significant paychecks that everyone was getting.
And that's actually one of our challenge assignments is for the senior leader to personally get to know each of the people in the portal. So I would argue that each of the new players, right? I would argue that in the world of the NIL, with so much roster churn, that maybe leadership is even more important. And you have to take an even more active role to socialize people and to acclimate them to the team's culture and the way that things are done. And so that doesn't happen by osmosis. In fact, it'll be most effective if that leader or a group of leaders, as Aaron set up, sort of reaches out and systematically makes sure that no one slips through the cracks, that no one misses those summer workouts, that they feel like they're part of the team. So instead of sort of getting the opportunity to wait till someone's a freshman, they redshirt, and 3 years later they feel like part of the team, you have to make them feel like part of the team immediately. And that has to happen very actively. It can only happen from the players. The coaches can't do that.
But from where Georgia is, I think, like I said, I like what Kirby does. He builds and develops from within and then picks the pieces so that, when you get 7 or 8 new guys, to Brian's point, I think it's a little bit easier to manage from a leadership standpoint, bringing guys into the fold, teaching them your systems when it's not 40 or 50 guys, obviously a bigger task.
Thank you for being here. I actually wanted to kind of touch a little bit more on the NIL and the transfer portal because.
So with your experience and what you're seeing today, what do you think would be the best way to maybe for like training coaches to either get adjusted to it, because it seems like players are kind of benefiting financially from it? So I guess my question would be like, what are your suggestions to them, or what do you think would be the best solution to that? Because it seems like a lot of people are also kind of complaining about it as well.
Well, it definitely puts a lot more on the coach's plate. That's and I always say, yes, Kirby gets paid what, $12 million a year, so I guess he can handle a few more responsibilities. But I think at the end of the day, being around coaches and being in a position of leadership, what we were talking about earlier, it's all about building that culture within the team. And obviously, it's easier to do that when you have guys that have been a part of your culture. I mean, think of Indiana, for example. Kirk Cignetti left James Madison, but he brought his entire roster pretty much with him. So he brought a culture with him from James Madison, from obviously the way he coached and his style, the way he formatted practices, but also brought these players that understood this is the system. This is how we prepare for games. This is how the week is kind of set up. And then they taught the existing players at Indiana, this is how we do it. And then obviously 2 years later, they win a national championship. So I think having that framework installed early is helpful, but to your point, it's more difficult now. So it's being more personal. It's putting more guys in positions to lead as well, I think will help.
And I mean, from my perspective also, you have to mix that with good talent acquisition, right? So you have to bring in the right people, not just the most productive people, the people that fit your system the best and fit your culture the best, and have to be very cognizant of that, just like in organizations, right? It's really quite similar. You got to have a good culture fit in addition to the technical expertise.
How much of it is like Moneyball almost?
Yeah, absolutely. A question in the back, I believe.
Your mic.
How old were you when you played your first football game?
Ooh, I want to say I was in 6th grade when I started playing football. It was the last sport. My mom, she never let my brother play. And it took a lot of persuading to allow me play. I played baseball, basketball, soccer, and finally just wore her down enough to where she let me play football. So now I'm going to have the same battle with my wife because she does not want our son to play football. So we'll see how long that lasts.
We have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah, I have a question. So thank you so much for tackling this issue of leadership. I'm gonna go back to one of Brian's points here about talent acquisition. So 2 questions. How do you filter out those people that don't have the capacity for great leadership, that are really more individual contributors? And then once you already get them in and you realize maybe they don't have the leadership skills, how do you develop that after the fact?
Yeah, so I mean,
Loaded.
that is we could write 50 books on that and never answer it well. So that's a tough question, for sure. So if you have the luxury of having these people in your organization, like the challenge assignment approach can do 3 things, right? It does something that is of value to the organization. It helps develop leadership, but it can also give you an idea and the person an idea of, hey, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I don't really want to move up in leadership. I really didn't like that one bit. And I think I will continue to be a role player and continue to have technical expertise. And so I think that's one way is in fact, the best, if you have them within your organization, is to enact that, and you can evaluate and see their leadership in action. And so can they. And then beyond that, I mean, there are various tools that we use. I got my start in leadership assessment centers, which are leadership simulations that have gotten more and more realistic in the last 5 or 10 years with technology. And so those are meant to target high potential people, put them in a simulation of leadership and sort of what leadership looks like at the next level, and see if they have the competencies to thrive at that next level. And so that's sort of one of our go-to tools as well. So sort of a mix of good internal strategy and sort of cultivating that group you have within your organization, as well as bringing in external help and using tools that can maybe help project what leadership looks like in the future.